Today's discussion revolves around how to get the most out of your app and best practices, how to differentiate your app and the benefits to gain and the potential direct impact to your bottom line. Our presenters today are Matt Carter and Joe Rose. Matt joined JBS in 2017 as a developer with over a decade of development, team management, and project delivery experience. As a member of the delivery leads group, his focus is making sure projects are well coordinated, on schedule, and within budget. Both Matt and Joe attended Georgia Southern University. Joe is our Senior VP of Delivery and has over 11 years of experience with retail, e-commerce, and multimedia web applications. With the introductions out of the way, Matt, can you provide us with an overview of the presentation today?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. So today I'm going to be talking about how your business can leverage a mobile app for more profitable revenue and things that apps provide uniquely to allow that, and things that you can do within your apps to help you realize that potential. So starting out, I'll go over how apps are generally unique compared to mobile web specifically. UI, UX concepts and design conventions that help customers navigate your app seamlessly. I'll talk about how apps enhance the in-store shopping experience and help customers get through the checkout line faster and more efficiently. Then I'll go into a little bit of detail about how apps can help you uniquely identify customer segments and engage those customer segments. And then we'll throw some numbers your way about conversion, AOV, LTV, and really show that app users do provide a greater long-term value. And then at the end, we'll go over some do's and don'ts that really are covering some things that you need to keep in mind with respect to starting your own mobile app. So leading in with the unique app experience. So apps inherently are unique to your shopping experience compared to web. And the reason that unique customer experience is important is because people are looking for that seamless transition through your flow. And retailers are picking up on customers' preference shifting from mobile web into native apps. In fact, over 47% of retailers have a dedicated mobile app experience because of this. And really, we know that retailers are making this shift, but why? They're seeing the numbers. So there's a study by eMarketer Research that looked at time spent on mobile devices and what people were doing on their mobile devices. And about 85% of the time, they're spending in mobile apps compared to mobile browsers, which actually lines up with Amazon's data, I think from 2019. They said that 85% of their mobile activity comes from their native app compared to their mobile website. So we have retailers making the shift to accommodate customer preference. What's driving that customer preference? So there's a number of things. The biggest one is an app's ability to more effectively and efficiently leverage device capabilities and hardware features. So things like camera, GPS, Bluetooth, NFC, or near-field communication. These are all things that, from a native app perspective, are really easy to implement technically, but also seamless from the user's perspective in using these features and capabilities. So you might use the device camera for allowing barcode scanning, which we'll get into a little bit later, or the GPS capabilities of the mobile device in conjunction with geofencing to know when someone has arrived at a store and showing them relevant coupons or other information. So another really big component of the convenience factor for customers preferring apps is the app's ability to seamlessly and effectively store user credentials and other app-specific or shopping preference-specific data on the device. On mobile web, that's a little more transient. It's harder to anticipate when a user's local storage or cookies or their session information, all of that can be cleared out if they choose to do so, whereas you have a little bit more tighter control with respect to storing that data on a device relevant to your app, and you have the control over when that gets updated or removed. A key feature of apps is also offline mode. So if I'm using my app in a store and I lose connectivity, in fact, there's a store local to me, it's a hardware store. Every single time I go into that store, I lose connectivity completely. And it's really frustrating. I can't use a browser at all. I have to rely on offline mode in an app. And that's pretty trivial to implement from an app perspective. So you can do things like in my example a second ago about geofencing. If someone arrives at a store, you know what store they're at, you know contextual information about that store, maybe store hours, services offered. With the stored user information by your app, you can offer a loyalty card that's scannable on the screen so they can go through the checkout flow and not have to worry about not having that connectivity. So that's a big advantage apps have over mobile web. And then finally, just from a high level, launching into a mobile app is just inherently different from a mobile website or a mobile web experience because the app is on the device, it's available at any time and instantly. The user knows where they're going, they click it and they're in your flow, and there's no clutter or noise, and they can stay focused and complete their objective, i.e. converting. Whereas mobile web, they might load Google, do a Google search and find maybe a competitor, maybe your website. They might have to look through their bookmarks to find a previously saved page from another browsing session. So there's some interesting friction points there compared to apps. And really, this study by Forbes kind of highlights that. So they surveyed mobile app users and asked them, why do you prefer mobile apps compared to mobile websites? And the top reason was convenience. Apps provide that seamless transition throughout the purchasing flow compared to mobile web. And then speed is obviously a big component here, not only from the device communication perspective, but also just the speed at which someone can use your app quickly and efficiently because it's a focused experience. And then stored settings, again, is a major component here because of stored user credentials. You don't have to go through the login screen every single time.
One thing I think is worth calling out on this particular topic, though, is that this doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't have a mobile website, and this doesn't necessarily mean that all users prefer mobile apps and therefore, just do a mobile app and nothing else. What we are seeing, though, is there is a segment of users that only want to engage on a mobile app and prefer mobile app. There's also a smaller, less revenue impactful set of users who don't want anything to do with an app. So we think that's an interesting point to make.
Yeah, well put, Joe. It's not meant to be a one-stop solution, but it is that growing preference. So it's important that you continue to offer any possible solutions. So we know that the app experience is unique compared to mobile web, and we know there is a very large presence of preference toward mobile apps. So what about the UI and UX specific to mobile apps drives that customer preference? And again, it goes back to that theme of seamlessness. If I'm using a mobile app on a device, say I'm on Android, there are certain design patterns and navigational conventions and gestures that I'm familiar with specific to Android that I'm going to be able to leverage across apps. And that just gives me that sense of familiarity when I'm going from one app to another on the device compared to web where it might be a little less consistent. Another big thing here is apps, through the use of hardware, can actually reduce users' or customers' reliance on keyboard input. So while we have the touchscreen device and all of your user interactions are sort of focused around that and the lack of hover states, we can do some pretty neat things. For example, you can allow your customer or user to point their camera at the front of a credit card, and it scans that and adds it as a stored payment method to their mobile wallet, for example. Another thing would be using GPS information to try and pre-fill a shipping address form. So anything that can be done to smoothly get customer input without requiring them to do as much typing as they would on web is going to be a huge win. Also, I touched on it briefly, but navigational conventions. So in Android, swiping from the outside of the screen, or in iOS, swiping right to dismiss screens. These are things that users are comfortable with using both on the device, first-party apps and third-party apps. That seamless, consistent flow of how user input is expected in an app really drives that convenience factor and makes it a smooth, consistent experience. And that also kind of plays into consistent controls and how they behave and how they're rendered. So a button is going to look more consistent across Android apps on the same device, provided you're adhering to style guidelines and design conventions again. So let's take a quick look at an example here. From left to right, we have the target home screen in the iOS native app, the Android native app, and mobile web browser, specifically Chrome on Android. So the first thing you notice right out of the gate is the bottom anchored navigation tab bar in iOS and Android, which isn't present at the bottom of the screen on mobile web. It's been moved up and consolidated, likely in an effort to try and reduce wasted space caused by that top browser navigation bar. The bottom anchored tab bar is something that I think was an iOS convention with respect to UI design, and more we're seeing Android support that, whereas Android tabs typically are top anchored. An important call out here is the cart icon in Android. That's a top right contextual button. That's an Android design and navigation convention, as well as the barcode scanning floating action button down near the top, the tab bar in that center screenshot. Another quick call out here, the product search input boxes. So on iOS, we've got a barcode scanning button embedded directly into it. Android has that plus a microphone button to allow for voice product search, and mobile web, you don't get either of those. Again, that goes back to an app's ability to really leverage the device hardware. So there's some important design considerations here across platform. In addition to the UI, UX design conventions and navigation conventions overall, you also get the benefit in a mobile app of having bundled resources in the client. You're not having to download images or custom fonts over your network connection, which means you're going to inherently have a little bit of a speed boost compared to mobile websites where you're relying on the client to download that. And should the browser cache get cleared, it'll have to download it again on the subsequent session. Also, because of apps' ability to more effectively leverage multi-threaded applications, you're able to do things like long-running tasks as background threads. So an example of this would be if you're scrolling through a product list from search results, the user's scrolling the endless list, and that animation, that scrolling animation, can continue to be smooth and operating on the main UI thread that's redrawing the screen, while maybe in the background you have another thread getting GPS updates for the user to see if they're walking into the store. And then finally, kind of a higher level note here, app users are a little more accepting of brand changes or unique colors and designs that you want to experiment with respect to your brand. So as long as you're operating within the conventions of the respective platform, you should be okay. I mean, users are, again, pretty forgiving there. They're looking for that innovation. So not only do we have the unique app experience and we've got benefits of mobile UI and UX over mobile web, we also see apps as an ability to enhance the in-store shopping experience. And really, this is, again, you think back to the Target screenshot. You have the barcode scanner. There's 2 points of entry in the Android app, and that's because retailers know through surveys and other data that customers are using and opening their apps while they're in the store to get contextual information and help them make purchases. So again, barcode scanning, not only just to look up your price checks, you could also leverage that to help customers add products to a wish list or a product side-by-side comparison scenario in your app. You scan multiple products and it shows individual attributes and lets the customer make an informed decision about their potential purchase. Also, getting a little crazy here, you can leverage augmented reality for in-store wayfinding. So there's actually that same store that I always lose connectivity, and I always get lost in that store too. It's a hardware store. So rather than asking someone for help, my wife loves this, but I always just load up the app and I look for a planogram location. And if you're not familiar with that, planogram is a detailed layout of the store and where all the products are located on shelves. So I rely on that in-store wayfinding, and that's really easy to do and to leverage as a customer through that mobile app. But the augmented reality example could be something like you walk into the store and through geofencing, through the GPS capabilities of the device, you know that that customer is in this particular store. If you have that product location data, you could have a specific spotter assume that they're looking from the entrance, and they can hold their phone up and scan the store, and you can actually visually indicate which aisles that customer might need to go to in order to find whatever products maybe that are on their wish list. Another thing, going back to geofencing, maybe when a customer arrives in a store, you know that they've arrived, so you can show relevant coupons, relevant events that might be happening at that store. You could show service hours or promos and other deals. Again, it's about providing contextual information to improve that shopping experience. And one of the major enhancements that apps can provide with respect to the shopping experience is curbside pickup. So Digital Commerce 360 did a study, and in December of 2019, there were 19 of the top 500 retailers that offered some variation of curbside pickup. By August 2020, that number is now 121. And obviously that's driven largely by COVID and the pandemic. But this is something that users are going to be more receptive to going forward. We find that once a mobile app user leverages that piece of functionality to enhance their experience, they're more likely to return and reuse it again. So a difference in how an app might make the curbside pickup experience smoother and more efficient compared to a mobile web offering. So actually, at one point in time, I did place a web curbside pickup order at a store, and I had to rely on an email notification to know when to go to the store. And once I parked in the parking space, I had to scroll through my emails, find it, click a button specific to my order and my curbside experience, which notified the store, and then they came out. Another way to do that might be you have signage at your parking space and people have to call in and alert the store that they're there. How an app can improve upon this is actually something we have direct experience doing. So JBS partnered with a major retailer to implement curbside pickup in less than 3 months. And we leveraged device GPS to sort of streamline this process and prevent all of these different input pain points from the customer's perspective. So we find that by increasing the ability of in-store employees to more effectively prepare for arriving customers, we're reducing the amount of time that it takes someone to arrive and pick up their order. So we continuously ping the GPS location as a customer arrives. We derive an estimated time of arrival, and that allows the store to more accurately prepare for people who are arriving first compared to just the order they submitted their curbside pickup orders. Another major thing that apps can do is to essentially serve as your payment method. So you can leverage Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay. There's a number of payment providers where effectively the app becomes your means of paying when going through checkout.
The other one that we're seeing too is that some of these retailers are taking their private label credit cards and making that an easy payment method in the app, which obviously means that the company saves tremendously on merchant fees and such. So not only is it a convenience driver, it also is a nice margin hit.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, by providing these additional options, so maybe you have private label credit cards that give you additional loyalty points when you're shopping in their stores over your competitors' stores. You're enhancing their experience. You're giving them reason to come back and continue to do business through your app and to monitor how many points and rewards they're accumulating. And again, using the mobile payment methods means that people don't have to hunt for their credit card. It's all stored in your app and available at any time. And then lastly, we've seen a couple of retailers start to implement scan and pay or self-checkout options through their native apps. So I know Dollar General, Sam's Club, Target even implemented this, where a customer takes your app, uses the barcode scanner to add products to their cart or to their bag as they walk around the store. And when they're ready to check out, all they have to do is approach an employee and they scan a QR code provided by your app. Their in-store app then looks up the information about the products they've added. Maybe it uses a stored payment method associated to that user's account, and you can settle the payment right there, and the user or customer doesn't have to even get in a line for a point of sale system. So we're reducing friction, and we're really highlighting the convenience provided by augmenting the real world experience through these app features and functionalities and different payment methods. So we know that users prefer this because there was a study that Cisco conducted where they surveyed mobile app customers and asked them, what enhancements in the real world would you be somewhat or very likely to use should it be provided through a mobile app? And in the middle of this list, you can see curbside pickup, scan and pay, augmented reality. These are all things that customers are willing to use. And I think it all just kind of boils up to that last point about optimized checkout. Everything, time is money. Everyone's trying to get in and out as quickly and efficiently as possible. So we've talked about how apps are different and how we garner or how we leverage that customer preference for apps over web and the unique features and functionality they provide in the in-store experience. So what can we glean about our customers from apps that are unique? So we can create a very simple customer segment, just as an example here. iOS versus Android users. Now, demographically speaking, iOS users have an average annual income that's higher than their Android counterparts. But we can take that a step further and say, if an iOS user has the newest phone model every year, we see them continuously upgrade that device. That might mean that they have more disposable income. They're more inclined to make more valuable overall purchases or more purchases altogether. So if we take that even further, we can do some interesting things. For example, leveraging GPS. We know when a customer comes or arrives at a store. We can target that customer, create a customer segment that says, if this person hasn't visited a store in 30 days, we might engage them with a push notification that gives them some incentive to return and make another purchase. Maybe it's a deal or store event. And the flip side of that is you can also engage customers as they arrive at a store and bring those things to their attention, make sure they're aware of them so they can more effectively shop. Another thing that I'd like to point out here is that push notifications are a mobile device specific form of engagement, and they're really unique in that even with an app closed, you can engage your customers and remind them about your brand, deals, other things that are happening that they might want to leverage. And this is something that a website just can't do. The website relies on you to be actively browsing it in order to have any kind of in-web or in-browser messaging. So push notifications are extremely effective. The opt-in rate across iOS and Android is on average about 66% compared to about a 3% approximately opt-in rate for email messaging. Now, Android skews a little bit on the higher side because it's an opt-out mechanism. So by default, anyone who installs your app on Android gets opted in for push notifications. But I'll talk about unsubscription rates in a second to really highlight users' tolerance for that messaging. So the reaction and click-through rates for push notifications are right around 7% compared to, I think it was about 1.5% to 2% for emails. And largely, the reason this can be so effective as an engagement strategy is if you're leveraging meaningful customer segments, then your users will be inclined to react and click through those push notifications. If you send relevant messaging, you're going to gain gain that additional click through compared to a more general, carte blanche messaging that might not apply to every single customer. Some other things you can do: if you add an emoji to your push notification, that increases the click through rate by 85% just on its own. If you add the customer's name into your engagement messaging, then it increases the likelihood of them opening your message by, I think, 4 times. And if you tailor it to in-app behaviors, so for example, if someone adds something to their cart and then they close the app and they don't check out within a certain amount of time, that can be a good customer segment to engage, because in-app behavior related messaging sees a 9-fold increase in the likelihood that a user will open that push notification and complete whatever action you're referencing. And then, like I said, the unsubscription rate is remarkably low, and we see a very high tolerance with respect to retail customers and users in apps. They can tolerate about 5 push notifications every day. So as long as you stay within that threshold, you'll see a comparable unsubscription rate as compared to emails, which is about 0.2 to 0.5% just on average across the board. So we've got meaningful customer segments. We're engaging our customers in unique ways that translate to really high click-through reaction rates. So how does all of this really translate to conversion rates and long-term value? Well, we know that not only do app users prefer apps, or they're starting to prefer apps more than websites, they're spending that time in those apps, right? So they're browsing more products. They're converting at 3 times the rate of their web counterparts. And again, it goes back to that convenience. And it's not a uniquely retail app statistic. Across different industries, we see that users are just much more likely, because of all of these benefits, to check out through an app compared to mobile web. So some numbers, we're seeing number of transactions increase. The number of mobile app specific transactions are increasing year over year. In 2022, e-commerce is expected to be $845 billion in revenue. And of that number, mobile app transactions are expected to be half of that. So we're seeing tremendous growth here. It's the shift. It's really indicative of the shift of that preference from web to apps. And then the cart abandonment rate is also remarkably low. Again, that goes back to customer segment and engagements, keeping users coming back through your app to complete their purchase and giving them that concise flow so they're not distracted by maybe other competitors. So once they make a purchase through your mobile app, they're also twice as likely to return within a month to make more purchases. So again, it goes back to how apps serve as an augmentation of the in-store shopping experience and don't necessarily cannibalize that. In fact, JBS, that major retailer I spoke about earlier, they did a study internally and found that app-acquired users are transacting the same amount of times in the app as they are in store, and one isn't stealing transactions away from the other channel. So it's causing users to engage more aspects of the business and shop different channels, leverage services more and other things compared to web users who tend to stay on web and they don't transact as often. Also, another statistic from that company, they found that app users are long-term adding 75% additional value compared to their web counterparts. And then just another interesting blurb here that iOS users, again, maybe it's driven by those demographic related statistics, but they tend to spend about 3 times more than Android users. So it's really, important to engage those customers in ways that are relevant to them, or that might have a higher impact on, their ability to make purchases. So wrapping all this up with do's and don'ts list. So these are things that you need to consider when your company, your business is thinking about creating a mobile app, or maybe you've just started and you're not sure what things you need to look out for. So the first thing is you should really, really not embed your mobile website in a web view in a hybrid app solution. I mean, in the beginning, yes, it will scale down, it will render properly, but you're going to run into some issues related to being able to communicate from the native portion of your app into that web view and vice versa. You'll have to create a communication bridge, maybe through JavaScript. That's going to become unruly and difficult to maintain in the long run. You're also going to have problems transmitting hardware information and stored credentials. So a lot of those benefits that we see in native mobile apps, you risk a clunkier experience or not even being able to implement those in an embedded web view approach. Also, you'll run into some performance issues because unlike native apps, web views are primarily single-threaded. So any extensive work you're doing through JavaScript, it's going to most likely translate to user interface hanging or becoming unresponsive at the worst. And web views, because they're running JavaScript and downloading all these extra resources, it's going to drain battery life and use more hardware resources. So another thing you need to keep in mind is when you're looking to build out your mobile app team, you need to make some decisions about what type of app you want to offer and what platform you want to offer it on. If you have an uncompromising vision of a pixel perfect experience, then you're going to want to go straight native. But that means you'll have to hire an Android development team and an iOS development team writing Kotlin and Swift respectively. They'll have to work in tandem, in parallel, on 2 separate code bases and keep that going forward. That can be cost prohibitive. That can also, have a timeline impact as well. So if those are things that might give you pause for concern, you could consider just targeting iOS. If you still have that uncompromising vision, you can write an iOS app. It has a higher market penetration than Android in the US. So that could be a good stopgap or potential solution for you. Additionally, another route you can go is a cross-platform native solution. So React, Xamarin, Flutter are examples of this. It allows you to have a team that writes one code base and deploy it across different platforms. Now, depending on your business and the technologies you tend to use within your business, it might make sense to go with React, for example, because maybe you did your mobile app or your mobile website in React. So that JavaScript syntax could carry over some resources and you might save some effort there. Likewise, with C# being Xamarin, if you're .NET centric, you might have some internal resources that are already familiar with the programming language, and it gives you a lower barrier to entry there. Also, another thing to keep in mind is permission handling in apps and disclosing what types of data and information you collect about users and what you're doing with it. Apple has recently started to ask app developers to disclose how they're tracking users and how they're storing information about users. But also, with respect to permissions, there's been a lot of updates related to that. We're seeing Apple and Google be more transparent with users and more strict about how permissions are granted in apps. And you want to make sure that you're requesting those appropriately and being upfront with users about how those permissions are being used to improve their experience. Another general takeaway would be to keep SDKs and third-party plugins and libraries up to date. This is just kind of a general tech debt related piece of advice. It's applicable in a lot of different areas, but specifically on mobile platforms, you want to make sure that you're always as up to date on the latest version if possible. Google and Apple do deprecate SDKs and various APIs that could lead to App Store rejections. If you have outdated plugins that get abandoned maybe in the open source community, you'll find yourself having to quickly find a replacement that might not integrate well with some other third-party plugins that you have. So keep that in mind. Always try and keep that up to date. It'll pay off in the long run. From an accessibility perspective, you also need to make sure that apps are usable by everyone, whether they have vision, hearing, cognitive, or physical movement impairments. Everyone should be able to use your app and complete the flow from start to finish, make the purchase, interact with it as needed. You'll bypass some legal issues, but it's also just the right thing to do. I mean, you don't want to preclude customers or potential users just because your app doesn't work with a voiceover, for example. And then lastly, I would strongly recommend a cloud-based backend to handle communication from your app clients, especially when it pertains to push notifications and customer engagement. When you send out a push notification to 200,000 users, a very large chunk of that user base is going to immediately open your app and go in and try to leverage whatever, a deal that you are offering them or anything else like that. So your backend needs to be able to scale up and or out as needed seamlessly with as little intervention as possible. JBS has experience doing this in Azure, AWS. We found a very large amount of success with Lambda and Aurora-based backends in AWS. And it's just very, very important that you make sure your app is reachable at all times. You don't want a user to become frustrated with not being able to load it. And with that, Bill, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Matt and Joe. With that, the presentation portion of our webinar is now complete. But before we open it up to questions, I'd like to let you know about the JBS Quick Launch Lab. If you're ready to quantify what it will take to add initiatives like machine learning to your current offerings, but aren't exactly sure where to start, the JBS Quick Launch Lab will deliver an approximate timeline, approximate cost, and an outline of high-level requirements. Additionally, we will recommend an architecture specifically tailored to your business objectives. It's a great way to get started on your new initiatives and is completely free. If you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out. So we have some questions here for Matt. Can Webrtc be used on a mobile website to allow barcode scanning?
Yeah, so Webrtc is a Google-backed JavaScript API that just recently came into play in Safari. They finally supported it. And it does allow websites through that JavaScript API to access the camera and microphone, and the RTC comes from real-time communication. So it's really meant for video and voice calling between peers. But there are some JavaScript not APIs, but frameworks out there that can leverage that for barcode scanning. But again, you're going to run into the problem of having to download that JavaScript package on the client in a web experience. Also, I touched on this before, but the web view and JavaScript running on the device, it's going to eat CPU and RAM and battery power. So there are some drawbacks. It's possible, yes, but it might not be as seamless as a mobile app.
Our next question, are there any other mobile payment providers besides Apple and Google?
Yeah, so let's see, we mentioned Google, Apple, and Samsung Pay. There's also PayPal. Their in-store transaction capability, I think, is driven by Google Pay under the hood, but that's another possibility. You have Venmo, Square Cash, and Zelle. Venmo and Square Cash For in-store transactions, they'll actually send you a debit card. So it's kind of a hybrid approach, but for, mobile e-transactions, I guess you could say, that could be some possibilities there, sure.
Then there's the private label that a lot of
And then,
companies
yeah,
are doing.
of course, your business's ability to provide that private label credit card, that can be another one as well. Yes.
Moving on, what role does app performance play on abandonment?
So there was a study, and they found that 70% of users actually say that app performance affects their willingness to convert, to make a purchase. And I think the statistic was if you get to 3%, or not 3%, if you get to 3 seconds load time, then you will decrease that conversion percentage by 30%, or it reduces by half. I'm not sure which one. But yeah, it absolutely does have an impact on conversions, and users, I think over 50% also were indicating that if there's an app performance related problem, they would become frustrated. And that's the last thing you want. So yeah, it absolutely does play a role.
Okay, I think we've got another one here. Are there any security concerns related to storing user credentials on devices?
That's actually a really good question. So on iOS, there's a secure keychain that your app can store data within, and that data gets encrypted automatically. On Android, it's secure customer or secure shared preferences, I believe. And same thing, any username or password that you want to store locally on the device for those stored user credentials for seamless reentry, you should put those there. They get encrypted automatically. And I believe another advantage of using that from the Android perspective is, as long as you store that data internally on the device's internal storage, as opposed to an SD card, no other apps can access that data. So it is incredibly secure.
Okay, we've got another one. How can developers optimize native screen layouts for the best performance?
Optimize native screen layouts. So there's a multitude of answers to this. Probably some of the big things that you can do to ensure that your native UI layouts or screens in your mobile app are as optimized as possible is keep the view hierarchy as simple as possible. You don't want to nest a lot of views and elements within each other. You want to use as small amount of views as possible. So in Android specifically, you don't want to nest a bunch of layout views. You want to make sure that you have a very flat XML structure there. You also want to avoid relative layouts where possible because they require a second measurement pass. So that's additional work that the device is having to do to figure out how to present that on the screen. For iOS, again, keep your zib as small and as concise as possible. You want to avoid things like dynamic heights on view containers. You want to set static heights where possible. You want to set views to be opaque. That prevents a transparency blending draw pass. And you want to just keep in mind that applying different effects like rounded corners and drop shadows, if you're doing that programmatically, it's going to require a second rendering pass to get that applied to the view. And then just from a general perspective, make sure you're caching large images wherever you can, and make sure you're disposing of things when people leave screens. And that's just general advice for both platforms.
Thanks, Matt. Looks like we've got one more here. The floor is still open. If you do have a question, you can leave that in the chat. Let's say a business already has a website. How can we get users to download and use our mobile app?
That's a good one. So there's actually a couple different ways you can do this. The big one is smart banners. You see it when you go to a website, the little bar that appears at the top or bottom of the screen that's advertising an app that is specific to whatever platform the person is on. Safari actually has a smart banner capability built into it, I believe. So you can leverage that. There's also JavaScript libraries that can let you easily just drop it in. It's not difficult to do. Another big way to get people from your website into your app once you have it available is, so not only are you marketing that app, hopefully, but you're also going to want to provide some deep linking capability. And what deep linking is clicking on a specific website URL gives the user on the device an option to open that destination in your mobile app instead of in the browser. And there's been some recent changes on the iOS side. I actually wrote a blog post about this, so it's right on the tip of my brain. I would encourage you to go check it out. But basically, you want to give users that deep link capability to get them into your app, and then once they're there, chances are good they're going to return to the app instead.
Thank you very much, Matt. From Matt and Joe, thank you guys for joining us today. At this time, if anybody has any more questions, let us know. If you don't, feel free to drop off, and feel free to visit our website, jbssolutions.com. Send an email to sales@jbssolutions.com. Thank you all very much for attending.